It was a quiet afternoon in the park. The sun was high in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the green grass. People were enjoying their day, some jogging, others walking their dogs, and a few sitting on benches, reading or just relaxing. Among them was an old man, his skin darkened by years spent under the sun. He sat alone on a weathered park bench, his hands resting gently on his cane. He wore a simple hat and a worn-out jacket, giving him the appearance of someone who had seen a lot in his time. In the distance, a group of teenage boys was walking through the park. They laughed loudly, their voices echoing through the trees. The boys were known in their neighborhood for their rude behavior and disrespect for others. As they approached the bench where the old man sat, they noticed him right away. One of the teens, a tall boy with messy hair, elbowed his friend and nodded toward the elderly man. "Look at him," he sneered. "What's he doing here?" The other boys turned to look. They saw an old man, his back slightly hunched, sitting quietly on the bench. They didn't know him, but it didn't matter to them. To them, he was just another old person, easy to ignore or make fun of. The leader of the group, a boy with a smug smile, walked toward the old man, his friends following closely behind him. "Hey, old man," the boy called out, his voice loud enough for everyone around to hear. The old man didn't respond. He just sat there, his gaze focused ahead. But the boys weren't about to let him be. "What, are you too old to talk?" the boy mocked. "Or are you too lazy?" The group of boys started laughing, their voices echoing around the park. They thought it was funny. The old man remained silent. He didn't even look at them. Instead, he continued to watch the birds fluttering in the trees. But the teens didn't stop. They came closer, standing around him, making comments about his clothes and the way he looked. The leader of the group took it a step further, standing right in front of the bench, blocking the old man's view of the park. "You're not going to just sit there all day, are you? Don't you have something better to do?" the boy asked with a grin, his friends chuckling behind him. The old man didn't react. His face remained calm, but there was a quiet strength in his posture. He didn't move or speak, as if the words didn't matter. The boys, growing bolder with each passing second, started to push him, poking at him and trying to get a reaction. They had no idea who he was. To them, he was just an old man to pick on, someone too weak to stand up for himself. As the teasing continued, the air around them seemed to grow heavier. But the old man's stillness only made the boys more curious. They had no idea that the man sitting in front of them wasn't just any elderly person. The quiet, calm figure they mocked wasn't just someone to ignore. He was about to show them something they never expected. The group of teenage boys continued to surround the old man. Their laughter filled the air as they pushed closer, enjoying the attention they were getting from each other. The leader of the group, a boy named Jason, leaned down toward the old man, sneering. "What's the matter, old man? Too slow to talk back. Are you scared of us?" Jason's voice was loud and mocking, meant to show off in front of his friends. The old man still didn't react. He kept his eyes fixed on the view in front of him, his fingers gently holding his cane. It was as if the boys didn't even exist to him. This made the teens grow even bolder. They pushed each other forward, daring one another to say something worse. The boys didn't care about who the old man was or what he might have gone through. To them, he was just a target, an easy person to make fun of. One of the younger boys in the group, a smaller teen named Max, decided to step up. He was eager to join in and show off. "Hey, look at this," Max said, laughing as he waved a hand in front of the old man's face, blocking his view. "Guess he's too old to even see us." His friends burst into loud, mocking laughter. Jason, feeling even more confident now that his friends were laughing, crossed his arms and leaned against the bench. "Come on, don't you have something to say? You look like you've been around for 100 years. Why don't you tell us a story, Grandpa?" The old man still didn't respond. His silence seemed to confuse the teens. Usually, when they picked on someone, they got a reaction, whether it was anger, tears, or someone begging them to stop. But the old man was different. He just sat there, unmoving, like he didn't even hear them. This made the boys feel both annoyed and curious. Jason's smile faded a little, but he quickly shook it off. "He's not even worth our time, guys," he said, turning to walk away. But Max wasn't ready to give up. He stepped forward again, standing in front of the old man. "What are you scared now, Jason? You think this guy is going to do something?" Max laughed loudly, turning to the old man. "Maybe we should teach you a lesson." Jason and the others exchanged uncertain glances. They had never seen anyone so calm in the face of their bullying. Usually their teasing made people upset, angry, or scared. But this old man was different. Max, eager to get a reaction, tried to push the old man slightly. The rest of the group, watching intently, expected the man to fall or shout at them. But the old man didn't fall. Instead, he stayed seated, and a small glint of something deeper showed in his eyes. His hand gently gripped his cane, his fingers tightening slightly as if he was preparing for something. The boys didn't notice. They were too busy laughing and enjoying their dominance over someone they saw as weaker. What the boys didn't know was that the old man was no ordinary person. Beneath his calm and quiet demeanor, there was a history the teens couldn't even begin to imagine. Max, feeling proud of himself for pushing the old man, stepped back and looked at his friends with a grin. "See, he's not even moving. This guy's a joke." His friends laughed along, their eyes still focused on the old man, waiting for him to do something. They were hoping he would finally react. But he just sat there, his hands resting on his cane, his gaze still calm and steady. Jason, the leader of the group, was starting to feel a little embarrassed. He had expected a bigger reaction, something that would make everyone laugh harder. But the old man wasn't giving them what they wanted. Jason, trying to cover up his frustration, looked at his friends and shrugged. "Forget it, guys. He's not worth our time." He was about to walk away when Max spoke up again. "Wait," Max said, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "What if we make him talk? Maybe we just need to push him a little harder." Jason hesitated. He didn't like the idea of pushing the man too much, but Max was already walking closer to the old man, his steps slow but confident. He leaned down, putting his face right in front of the old man's, waiting for a response. "Come on, old man," Max said. "What's wrong?" "Too tired to speak." The old man didn't even blink. He just stared ahead, his eyes sharp and focused, as if he was completely unaffected by Max's words. This silence, however, only made Max more determined. He took a deep breath and shoved the old man's shoulder lightly, expecting him to fall over or at least react in some way. But the old man didn't budge. Instead, he slowly straightened his back and looked directly into Max's eyes for the first time. For a moment, everything went quiet. Max froze, caught off guard by the sudden shift in the old man's demeanor. There was no anger in his eyes, no fear, just calm, steady strength. Max didn't know it, but this was the first time he had seen true confidence from someone who didn't need to show off or get upset to prove their power. The old man's lips parted slightly, but he didn't speak. Instead, he lifted one hand off his cane and pointed with a single finger at Max's chest. It wasn't an aggressive move, but it was firm, purposeful. For a split second, Max felt a strange chill run down his spine, as if the old man was silently warning him not to push further. Max pulled back a little, not sure what to think. Jason, who had been watching closely, stepped forward, sensing the change in the air. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice losing some of its earlier bravado. "What's he gonna do? Teach us a lesson?" The old man still said nothing, but his posture changed. It was subtle, but Jason noticed it. The man's shoulders relaxed, and he leaned forward slightly, as if preparing for something. Jason, unsure of what to expect, looked at his friends. The laughter had faded, replaced by a quiet uncertainty. The group of boys wasn't sure whether to stay and keep pushing or walk away before things got worse. What they didn't know was that the old man was not someone to be taken lightly. He wasn't just an old man waiting for the day to end. He was someone who had seen and experienced more than they could imagine. And soon, they would understand just how powerful silence and calm could truly be. Jason and his friends stood in a tense silence. They were all looking at the old man, who hadn't moved, but his presence seemed to have changed the atmosphere around them. What was once a group of teens laughing and having fun now felt uncertain and unsure. Max, still standing closest to the old man, took a step back, not sure what to expect. Jason, trying to shake off the unease, cleared his throat and said, "Okay, what's going on here? You going to tell us why you're just sitting there, not saying anything?" His voice was more hesitant now, though he was still trying to act tough in front of his friends. But the old man didn't answer. Instead, he slowly stood up. The teens watched in surprise, wondering what was going on. The old man's movements were smooth and controlled, his body straightening with ease, as though he had done this countless times before. It was clear he wasn't as frail as they had assumed. For a moment, it looked like he might just walk away. But instead, he shifted into a stance, one that made the boys pause. It wasn't a regular stance. His feet were planted firmly on the ground, his body slightly turned, and his hands were held in a position that felt strangely familiar. But none of the boys could place it. Max stepped forward again, looking at his friends. "What's he doing?" he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "Is he crazy?" Jason frowned, stepping a little closer. "Who knows? He's probably just some old guy who's lost it." But they were wrong. The old man was far from crazy. He was doing something they had no idea about. With one smooth, controlled motion, he raised his hands, bringing them together with a quiet, graceful movement that seemed like it belonged in a dance or a performance. The teens were all watching, now completely unsure of what was happening. Jason was about to make another joke when the old man moved again, faster than any of them had expected. He raised his foot and performed a quick, precise kick, just barely missing Jason's chest. Jason stumbled backward, shocked at how fast the old man had moved. His friends gasped, their eyes wide with surprise. The old man hadn't even broken a sweat. He stood still, his posture calm and collected, as if he had just done something normal. Max, still confused, took a step toward the old man. "Hey, what are you doing? You trying to hurt us or something?" But the old man didn't respond. He simply stood there, his eyes locked on Max, as though waiting for the next move. The teens didn't understand what was going on. What was this old man doing? Why was he acting so different? It was then that something clicked in Jason's mind. He remembered a story his older brother had told him about a legendary carrot master who had disappeared many years ago. The story had been a local legend, one that was told in whispers among the older generation. Jason had never paid much attention to it. But now, looking at the old man's graceful movements, the memories suddenly flooded back. Could it be? Was this the same man? Before Jason could ask, the old man shifted again, his stance poised and calm. Jason's heart raced. This wasn't just some frail old man. He was something more. And now the boys were starting to understand. They had just met a true master, someone whose strength wasn't in how loud he could shout, but in how calmly and quietly he could move. The atmosphere around the group of boys had changed completely. What had started as a playful, mocking situation was now something far more serious. Jason, Max, and the others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The old man had shown them a glimpse of something that they couldn't ignore, a skill, a calm power that they didn't know was possible. Max, still unsure, took a step back. What's he gonna do now? He whispered to Jason, who was equally stunned. Jason swallowed, his mind racing as he tried to figure out what was happening. The old man was standing in front of them, calm and unbothered, like nothing was out of the ordinary. But for the first time, Jason felt a little afraid. Then, without warning, the old man moved again. His body shifted like a breeze, swift and smooth. Before anyone could react, he darted forward with incredible speed. Max, who was standing closest, barely had time to lift his arms to protect himself. The old man's hand shot out, and with one quick, controlled motion, he tapped Max on the shoulder. It wasn't hard. There was no aggression in the movement, but it was enough to make Max lose his balance. Max stumbled backward, his feet slipping on the grass as he tried to steady himself. "Hey!" he yelled, his voice shaky as he looked at the old man with wide eyes. He had never seen someone move so fast, especially someone so old. What was that for? The old man didn't say anything. He simply stood still, his posture calm, his hands relaxed by his sides. There was no anger in his eyes, only quiet focus. The teens stood in stunned silence, watching him closely, their earlier laughter and confidence now replaced by confusion. Jason stepped forward, trying to regain some of his lost bravery. "What are you doing, old man?" he said, his voice trembling slightly despite his efforts to sound tough. "You can't just push people around like that." The old man didn't respond. He didn't need to. He was letting his actions speak for him. With a small movement, he raised his hand, signaling that the game was over. He wasn't here to argue or fight. He was simply showing them that he could take control of the situation whenever he chose to. Jason glanced at his friends, his mind working quickly. What had they just witnessed? Was this man some kind of martial arts expert? Had they just made a huge mistake by picking on him? He looked back at the old man, his thoughts racing. This wasn't a game anymore. This was something serious. "Okay, we get it," Jason said, his voice quieter now. "We're sorry, all right." But the old man didn't acknowledge the apology. He simply turned and began to walk away, his cane tapping lightly against the ground with each step. His movements were fluid and deliberate, like someone who had spent years perfecting his every action. The teens watched in stunned silence, unsure of what had just happened. For the first time, they realized they had underestimated him. They had thought he was just an old man, someone easy to tease and mock. But now, they were starting to understand. He wasn't just anyone. He was someone with skills and wisdom beyond anything they had ever expected. The group stood still, watching him disappear into the distance. They didn't know it yet, but this moment would stay with them forever. The old man had shown them something they would never forget, not with words, but with actions that spoke louder than anything they could have imagined. The group of teens stood in the park, watching the old man walk away. His cane clicked gently against the pavement as he moved further from them. For a few moments, no one said anything. The park, once filled with the sound of their laughter, was now eerily quiet. Max, who had been closest to the old man, was still trying to wrap his mind around what had just happened. "Did you see that?" he asked, his voice low. "How did he move so fast?" Jason, usually the boldest of the group, was quiet. He didn't answer right away. His eyes were fixed on the old man's retreating figure. The older boy's mind was racing. "He's not just some old guy," Jason finally said, shaking his head. "He's something else. We messed up." The other boys nodded, still unsure of what they had just seen. They had come into the park expecting a laugh, expecting an easy target to bully. Instead, they had met someone who was far more than they could have imagined. The old man had shown them a level of skill and grace that left them speechless. Jason turned to his friends, his face a mixture of confusion and regret. "We need to apologize," he said quietly. "He didn't do anything to deserve what we did. He didn't fight back, but that doesn't mean he's weak." Max looked over at him, his eyes wide. "Do you think he'll talk to us if we say sorry?" Jason wasn't sure, but he nodded anyway. "We can't just walk away like this. We've got to show some respect." The group slowly began to move, their steps uncertain as they followed the old man's path through the park. They found him sitting on another bench a little farther down, his back straight, his hands folded on his lap. The moment they approached him, the old man glanced up, but he didn't say anything. He simply looked at them, his expression calm. Jason, who was leading the group now, stepped forward. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to start. Excuse me," he said, his voice softer than before. We wanted to apologize for the way we treated you. We didn't know who you were." The old man didn't respond immediately. He simply continued to look at them with those steady eyes, as though weighing their words. The silence stretched on, making the teens feel even more uncomfortable. Finally, the old man spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "You didn't know who I was," he said, his eyes moving from one boy to the next. "But you should have known better than to treat someone that way. No one deserves to be treated with disrespect, no matter who they are." Jason and the others lowered their heads, feeling ashamed. They had known it was wrong to pick on the old man, but now, hearing his words, they understood just how wrong they had been. "I'm sorry," Jason said, his voice sincere. "We were wrong to make fun of you. We didn't mean to hurt you." The old man nodded, his expression softening. "Apologies are important," he said quietly, "but actions speak louder than words." Max, feeling guilty, spoke up next. "We'll do better. We'll show more respect from now on." The old man smiled slightly, as if he knew they meant it. "Good," he said. "Remember, respect is something you earn, but it starts with how you treat others." With that, the old man stood up slowly. The boys watched as he moved gracefully, his cane tapping lightly on the ground. He didn't seem to hold any anger, only a quiet wisdom that left the boys in awe. As the old man walked away again, the group stood in silence. They had learned something important today, not just about the old man, but about themselves. They realized that strength wasn't always about size or power. Sometimes it was about how calmly and peacefully you handled a situation. And as they watched the old man disappear from view, they'd promised themselves they would never forget the lesson he had taught them. The boys stood in the park for a while after the old man had left. The air felt different now, as if something had shifted. They had come to the park thinking they could have a little fun at the expense of someone they thought was weak. But now they were left with a feeling of unease, a mix of guilt and awe. Jason, still processing everything that had happened, finally broke the silence. "I can't believe what just happened," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "We were making fun of him, and he didn't even get mad. He just showed us something. I don't think any of us expected that." Max, who had been staring at the ground, nodded slowly. "Yeah, I thought he was just some old guy. I didn't think he could move like that. He was like a whole different person when he stood up." His voice trailed off as if he were still trying to understand it all. The other boys exchanged glances, unsure of what to say next. They had all seen the same thing. The old man had shown them a level of calm strength that they hadn't even known was possible. And in doing so, he had revealed something much more important than just his skills. Jason ran a hand through his hair and looked at his friends. "You know, I think that's the whole point. We were picking on him because we thought he was weak. But he didn't need to shout or fight back. He just showed us what real strength is. It's not about being loud or tough. It's about being calm and in control." Max nodded again, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "Yeah, I think he was teaching us a lesson, but not with words. He didn't even yell at us. He just showed us that we were wrong." Jason looked at his friends, his expression more serious now. "And that's what makes him strong. It's not about using force. It's about knowing when to step back, when to stay calm, and when to stand up for yourself. He didn't have to fight us. He just let us see how foolish we were." For a few moments, no one spoke. The group of teens was deep in thought, reflecting on the lesson they had just learned. They had expected a simple day of teasing, but instead, they had been shown something far more powerful, the kind of strength that came from inside, not from physical force. Finally, Jason spoke again. I think I get it now. We were treating him like he was less than us, like he didn't deserve respect. But he didn't need to prove anything. He was already showing us something better than any fight. He was teaching us how to be better. Max smiled a little, his usual cocky attitude replaced with something more genuine. Yeah, I think we all learned something today. I don't think we'll ever treat anyone like that again, not after what we saw. Jason nodded, a sense of peace washing over him. We've learned a lot, and we should thank him for showing us what true strength really is. With that, the boys walked away from the park, their steps lighter, their hearts filled with a new understanding. They didn't know it yet, but this moment would stay with them forever. They had learned that strength wasn't just about being tough or powerful. It was about kindness, humility, and knowing when to be calm in the face of a challenge. And as they left the park, they couldn't help but feel a deep respect for the old man, who had quietly changed their lives without saying a word. The next few days after the encounter in the park were quiet, but the lessons the boys had learned stayed with them. They couldn't stop thinking about the old man and the way he had handled the situation. It was almost as if he had left them with a puzzle to solve, one that they were slowly beginning to understand. Jason found himself thinking about it the most. He had always prided himself on being the toughest guy in his group of friends, always the one to stand out. But after what had happened, he realized that true strength wasn't about being the loudest or the most powerful. It was about knowing when to step back and act with respect. He began to see things differently, from the way he treated others to how he responded to challenges in his life. Max, too, had changed. The teasing and joking that used to come so easily to him now felt different. He remembered the look in the old man's eyes, calm and steady, and it made him uncomfortable to think about how he had treated someone so quietly strong. He knew he had to be better, not just because the old man had taught him, but because he wanted to be someone who could show kindness instead of cruelty. A week later, the group of boys found themselves back at the park. They had come to walk around, not knowing exactly why they were there. It was a warm afternoon, and the park was as peaceful as ever. The air smelled fresh, and the sound of birds singing filled the space around them. But as they walked, Jason couldn't help but feel that something was missing. They had learned so much from the old man, but they hadn't had a chance to thank him. "Do you think he'll be here today?" Max asked, his voice full of curiosity. Jason glanced around the park. "I don't know, but we should look for him. I think we owe him an apology and a thank you." The group began to walk through the park, looking for the old man, though they weren't sure if he'd be there. As they passed the usual spots, they kept their eyes open, hoping to see the figure that had taught them so much. They didn't know if they would get a chance to speak with him again, but they wanted to show him that they understood his lesson. After a few minutes of searching, they spotted him. He was sitting on the same bench as before, just like he had been that day. He looked as calm and composed as ever, the same peaceful aura around him. This time, however, the boys didn't feel the need to make fun of him. Instead, they felt a deep respect. Jason walked up to him first, his steps slow and steady. "Excuse me, sir," he said quietly. "We just wanted to say thank you for everything you taught us." The old man looked up, his eyes soft and wise. "You're welcome," he said, his voice as gentle as ever. "I didn't do much. You've learned what you needed to learn." Max stepped forward, his voice sincere. "We were wrong before. I didn't understand it at first, but now I get it. You showed us that real strength is about being calm, not about how loud you are or how strong you look. You didn't need to prove anything." The old man nodded, a small smile appearing on his face. "It's good to understand that," he said. "True strength comes from within, from how you treat others. It's something you have to carry with you every day." The boys stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of his words sink in. They hadn't just learned how to be stronger. They had learned how to be better people. They had learned that the most important strength is the one that comes from kindness, respect, and self-control. As they walked away from the bench, they felt lighter. They knew they would never forget the old man and the lessons he had taught them. His quiet wisdom had left a lasting mark on their hearts, and from that day forward, they promised to carry it with them, always remembering that true strength wasn't about making others feel small, but about lifting them up. Days turned into weeks, and the boys never forgot what had happened in the park. The old man's lesson had stayed with them, guiding their actions in ways they hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the apology or the way they had treated him. It was about how they saw the world and the people around them. Jason, who had once been quick to make fun of others to fit in, had started treating people with more respect. He found himself holding doors open for others, listening more carefully when people spoke, and showing kindness instead of acting tough all the time. He had learned that being strong didn't mean putting others down. It meant lifting them up. Max, who had always liked to joke around at others' expense, had become more thoughtful in his words. He started thinking before he spoke, wondering how his words might affect the people around him. It was a small change, but it made a big difference. Max noticed that when he spoke kindly to others, they responded in a way that made him feel good inside. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. The group of boys, once known for their loud laughter at others' expense, now walked through the park with a different sense of purpose. They didn't try to stand out by making fun of people or showing off. Instead, they showed respect, and people began to notice. They weren't the bullies they had once been. They had learned that true respect came from treating others how they would want to be treated. One afternoon, Jason and his friends were sitting at a cafe near the park when they saw someone familiar walking down the street. It was the old man. He was walking slowly, but his movements were as graceful as ever. Without thinking, Jason stood up and walked over to him, followed by Max and the others. "Hey, sir," Jason said with a smile. "It's us again. We just wanted to thank you again for everything. We've changed a lot since we saw you last." The old man looked at them, his calm eyes softening. "I see," he said with a nod. "I'm glad to hear that. Change takes time, but it's worth it." "We're not perfect," Max added, "but we're trying. We're really trying to be better people." The old man smiled, his eyes twinkling with kindness. "You don't need to be perfect," he said. "The important thing is to keep learning and growing. The moment you stop trying is the moment you stop moving forward." The boys nodded, feeling the weight of his words. They had learned that strength wasn't about having all the answers. It was about being open to change, willing to learn, and having the humility to admit when they were wrong. They had learned that it was never too late to start treating others with respect, and that every day was a chance to be better. As they stood there, talking with the old man, Jason realized something. The lesson he had learned that day in the park wasn't just about kindness or strength. It was about the power of humility. The old man had never acted superior. He had never raised his voice or tried to control them. He had simply shown them how to be better by being calm, patient, and kind. With one last smile, the old man waved goodbye and continued his walk. Jason and his friends watched him go, feeling the deep sense of gratitude. They knew they would never forget the lesson he had given them, a lesson not just in strength, but in how to be good people. And as they walked away from the cafe, they felt lighter, knowing that they had changed for the better. They would carry the old man's wisdom with them for the rest of their lives, and it would always guide them on their journey.